One of the greatest barriers is that activism generally has a tendency to burn out. It's a flash in the pan thing. And then on the other side, you've got kind of charity work, which often fulfills like a really important role in dealing with the symptoms of various inequalities and whatever else, but not necessarily with the causes. Because of their financial structure and their makeup, they can't like take on, they're a bit politically like toothless in challenging stuff. So it's about finding ways in which we can create organizations which are sustainable, democratic, and actually have impact at the same time. That's one of the things that we're toying with in Bristol, and one of the reasons why we chose a cooperative model that informs like our editorial decisions, the type of content we do, the fact that we can challenge, politicians in the city, big business, etc. Those are the sorts of things that we wouldn't be able to do if we had a conventional funding model, which relies on like advertising or grants from more kind of conservative foundations. So it's about trying to find ways in which we can actually sustain our organizations and not kind of just rely on the traditional forms of revenue.
Speaking specifically of the biggest barrier, I think it is probably A, ourselves, and B, the whole idea of activism in the first place. Because I feel like sometimes when we talk about activism, it's like this thing that's over here and it's difficult for people to engage with, because it's almost like sometimes people who call ourselves, when we call ourselves activists, we expect people to engage with us. We have something important to say and you should care about it too. And I think it sometimes creates a gap or creates a barrier. So I think the actual term activism and maybe the way how, not historically, well, yeah, historically people have seen activism. I think this is can be problematic, and I feel like maybe if we re-look at this and think about how do we engage with people, not people engaging us, but how do we engage with people? How do we go into our communities and actually talk about things that concern everybody, not just what we think is important to them?
A lot of the stuff that I do at the moment is around Black Lives Matter in the UK. Takes really seriously the problem of deaths in custody in this country. And when you're talking about deaths in custody, the first barrier you're going to come up against is the law that is hundreds of years old. It has principles that are hundreds of years old, and it has certain prejudices which are hundreds of years old too. Violent killings or deaths that we've seen throughout the UK are part of, for us, a kind of wider system of violence that takes place within the state. And so we're asking very fundamental questions about, well, what is the use of policing if it's producing these outcomes? And so to question that really directly is another barrier. These things are really entrenched in our society. There's an undeniable element of racism when we talk about state violence, and that's why Black Lives Matter is the campaign that it is. You're also talking about not only the state's problem, but how that then has a kind of role with white society too, and the fact that there's a complicity that goes on. So you're asking people to criticize something on the basis that it acts in their interests, and that's another barrier. That's not something that's easy to convince people of, I think. So what are the tactics that we employ to kind of work against this? Well, partly it's that we want to take direct action. We want to take action that is gets to actually changing what we see as injustices by changing it ourselves. Whether that's on a huge scale, as in the shutdown of Heathrow Airport that happened on the 5th of August this summer, directly stopping and disrupting a society which is ignorant to the killings in your community, or on a more day-to-day level when we're talking about things like stop and search, where we tell people that they shouldn't walk on by, and that to intervene in the stop and search, to not allow that process to happen without anyone monitoring or saying that it is an injustice in itself, is also a form of direct action. That's the kind of action we want to kind of promote. And then finally, there's the question of that we want to embody this in exactly how we organize too. Black Lives Matter in the United States was a movement founded by three queer women, Patrisse Cullors, Opal Tometi, and Alicia Garza. And so our movement has to be led by queer people, led by trans people, led by women, led by migrant people, and that's again a part of acting directly on racism in our society. So that's the barriers we face and some of the tactics we're using to oppose it.